Welcome back to Something Private, a podcast for Southeast Asian women by Southeast Asian women, exploring conversations around health, the self, community, and love. My name is Nicole, and I am your producer and host. It's our last episode of Season 4, and we've got a really special one. But not before we do a quick recap on all the amazing women that we've featured on our platform so far. Cue the montage! From a South Korean feminist who wants to empower women across Asia to take care of their own reproductive health, to a Malaysian celebrity chef who's using her platform to share about her struggles living with endometriosis and polycystic ovarian syndrome. Season 4 has been about hearing different perspectives from across Southeast Asia, and over 10 episodes, we've come to realize that our struggles and fight for equality are actually pretty similar. So we want to run up our season with a story of hope. As Singapore's youngest current serving member of parliament and a young mother of two, Raeesah Khan from the Workers' Party has had an eventful first year serving as an opposition MP. As someone who's only 2 years her junior, I felt like our lives could not be more different. I was really curious to hear her story, what it's like joining politics with barely any prior experience, her thoughts on being a representative for minority voices, how she coped with the investigations over a year ago for her online comments about race and religion, and her present determination in bringing up more controversial issues like sexuality education in Parliament.
Hi, I'm Raeesah, a Member of Parliament for Sengkang GRC.
Hi Raeesah, thanks for being here, joining us today. I usually like to start my episode asking my guests to share something private about themselves.
Sure. Something about me that nobody really knows is that I love young adult fiction.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I still read it to this day.
Like, is it like your guilty pleasure?
Yeah, kind of. And I love like chick lit young adult fiction as well. But most recently, I've really been into like dragons and magic and kind of delving into like those types of worlds. I think the first kind of young adult like magic-y fiction that I read was Aragon. Mm-hmm. So that whole Inheritance series. It's very nerdy.
I enjoyed it.
Did you? Yeah, good. So I even recently just kind of finished all the books again. Okay. Yeah, just to I know it's like kind of relaxing for me. But then I think like if you want to kind of upgrade from that, I love Wise Man's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss as well. Yeah,
she's a reader.
Yeah, of science fiction.
Thank you for being on the show. Very excited to have you here. I really wanted to do an episode with you for a really long time. I think one thing that is most shocking to me, or that I feel is really amazing, is that our age gap is not that big. I'm only, I think, like 2-3 years younger than you, and yet I don't know, you feel a lot more adult than me.
I'm not, trust me. I up till a year ago, we were still like sleeping on the mattress on our floor.
That makes me better. But you are currently now the youngest serving Member of Parliament in Singapore at the age of 27. It's been a year since you entered politics. A lot has happened since then. I think I want to ask, first and foremost, how has the year been for you?
So it's definitely been a tough journey, I think. And it's been full of ups and downs. But I'm really grateful that I've had a really incredible team around me. So I think we've built a really great group of people serving residents in Compassvale. And also, of course, assisting me in different things. But it's definitely been a year full of growth. I've learned a lot. And I'm definitely going to keep learning.
Tell me a bit more about your journey entering politics. When did that start?
So I volunteered with the party for about a year and a half before I was approached to run as a candidate. Before, I never really saw myself as entering politics. I always thought I would kind of stick with the area that I know, which is in activism and civil society. Basically, what I love the most is running programs and projects with communities. So I never really saw myself as really even a politician. And even now I don't. Like, it still kind of shocks me that, this is the title that I have. My journey hasn't been linear. I think it's never been my goal to be a member of parliament. But of course, now that I am, I take it really seriously, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity.
Was there that one moment where, or what was that moment where you were approached and you were like, okay, like this is something that I would seriously consider doing?
Yeah, I spoke to it with my husband and my family, and especially my dad. He was really supportive, and my husband as well. He was like, this is a really great opportunity to include your voice and the people you might represent, their views in the conversation, even if it's just in the conversation during elections. I mean, my objective was to ensure that our voices were included in the conversation. So I think the conversation did change, and it was really lovely to see a lot of young people coming together and like creating all these resources for elections.
On that note about, having more young people involved in these particular elections, I feel like, I don't know, this whole election was really, it felt very unexpected to me, and it was my first time voting as well as a young
congratulations.
voter. It was very exciting.
Yeah, it's so exciting to be I remember my first time voting. It was really exciting. Yeah.
I was like nervous, like queuing and everything.
Yeah.
I guess on that vein, what were some of the things that, you had anticipated that, entering politics would be like, versus like how it actually like panned out? I guess like expectation versus reality, right?
I mean, for me, I expected like personal attacks, but I thought they were going to be like about my age.
Which surprisingly there weren't.
Yeah.
There weren't many. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was kind of pleasantly surprised by that. But of course, other things happened that no one predicted. Yeah.
The fact that you are currently the youngest serving MP, and not to touch on that aspect of gender, but even though there are more women in parliament now, majority of them are men. Is it daunting or scary to you sitting in a room full of like, firstly, people who are a lot more older than you, with many years of experience in politics, and also being of like the minority race and gender, right? How has that been like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very lucky because within the party, I'm treated as an equal. And, even when we have discussions amongst all the Workers' Party members of parliament, it's always an open discussion, and I'm always invited to contribute my opinions or views. But, in parliament, it is pretty daunting, especially, so I sit in the media gallery because of COVID measures, and the media gallery overlooks like the entire parliament. And just stepping in and seeing, the speaker's chair and all the other seats on the sides and things like that is a pretty daunting experience. And now, because the telecasts are live, so I always keep in mind like, oh no, it's live, if I make a mistake or if I trip, I've had nightmares where like I trip because there are so many steps to the podium. So I've had nightmares where like I trip on the way to the podium and things like that. So yeah, it is pretty daunting in parliament. Yeah,
I can only imagine. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. Like, how much do you usually like rehearse before you were to deliver like a speech, for example?
So I work a lot on the content of the speech, and then of course I do like rehearse quite a bit, and also I think about the questions that could be asked. And how I would answer them. It takes a lot of time for me to prepare for Parliament. And my team works really hard in researching the content and what the topics that I want to speak on. Like, for example, for the adjournment motion, my team and I spent hours and hours and hours preparing it. And I spent, just as much time rehearsing it and going through it again.
Given your age, has there ever been an incident where outside of your party, you were not taken seriously, or like you felt like your opinions were not heard, or you didn't have a space to share your thoughts?
I'm very lucky because of the way my parents brought me up. So I grew up in a house where everyone's opinion mattered, and because of that, I was given the confidence to, always speak my mind. So I carry that confidence with me, where I go and when I have conversations.
I think that's very important. I came from a household where, no lah. No, but I think that's a really important point, because, if you didn't come from a place where you felt like your opinions mattered, I think it translates into later parts of your life, right? And then you end up in situations where you feel like you don't deserve to like take up space, or that your opinions are not valid. But many a times I think like everybody's opinion is valid. To a degree valid, right?
Yeah.
You are also a recent mother of two.
Yes,
So,
yeah.
congratulations.
Thank you.
How has the journey of juggling motherhood and politics been for you?
It's not been easy, but it's definitely been made easier because of the support I have at home. So my mom helps us care for our kids. And, very, very early on, even before my first son was born, we did have a discussion around gender roles and how we would navigate that within our relationship and how we would navigate the role of caregiving. And we did decide that, it should be 50-50. And for the most part, it has. So, because his workday is a lot more structured. So in the evenings, he takes the children, and during the weekends as well. So that's like usually when I'm the busiest on house visits, meet the people session, and on a state walk. So he takes like a very, very proactive role in that regard.
Yeah. Firstly, is it unfair for me to ask you whether it's been tiring? Because I feel like, typically, this is a bit of like a contentious issue, right? Like, I think people don't generally ask like men, for instance, like, how has fatherhood been like? And for obvious reasons.
Or how has it changed your career when, probably hasn't.
Correct. But it's also because, like, as a mother, you do carry the baby to like full term, and you do the delivery, and like recovery is a long process. It can be very emotional. So I'm very curious to know, like, has it been tiring for you, especially since I guess being an MP is, like we were discussing just now, it's a round-the-clock job.
Yeah, definitely, like, it's being both physically and emotionally exhausted. But because, like I said, my husband and I like share the role of being parents equally, we're both equally exhausted. But I think it's important to talk about the struggles of caregiving and how much of a toll it takes on people. And unfortunately, majority of caregivers are women. So I think it is important to talk about it in that aspect. How do we move the conversation from like, how has motherhood impacted your career to how can we balance the role of caregiving at home? And that includes things like household chores, even, cooking and organizing our children's lives. Because it's not only the fact that you have to take care of your children, but you have to organize many things as well. And that takes an emotional, toll on whoever's doing it. So I think it would be good to start having that conversation. I think we are moving towards having that conversation on how we can create a balance in our households.
It's been slightly over a year since you've entered politics. It's also the 1-year anniversary since a police report was made against you for some of the racist remarks that you made on social media.
And I was investigated.
Yes.
I can laugh about it now, but yeah.
When the whole incident was happening, I think so many things came to mind, right? The idea of like, it was like political, it was also like a racial issue, and then there was this whole idea of like young versus old. There were so many like camps. The people supporting you, most of them were young people who saw that there were a lot of like racial inequality happening in the country. And then on the flip side, the older generation was, not all, but some of them were a bit more opinionated about the fact that this was necessary. So let's talk a bit about that.
So it definitely was a very tough time. But I think the only positive about that is it did bring conversations around race and inequality to the forefront of the election period, I think, especially with young people. So I think, to me, that's probably the only positives that I see. But it definitely did begin some very important conversations as well when I was on house visits, when I was speaking to residents who were, from the older generation. And, there were people who came to me and said, and these are older people who came to me and said, yes, I did experience or I did encounter racism. But then, of course, there were also people who were saying, what you did was wrong, and
they said it to your face.
Yeah, they did. I'm someone who's not fazed by tough conversations. So I think I saw that as an opportunity to have, a very civil discussion on race and on inequality. And even though we didn't always meet eye to eye at the end of the conversation, at least they were able to see that, we could have a rational conversation about it. And, perhaps that was something that they wanted to see in their representative.
We're taking a short break. Something Private is a podcast produced under media publisher Our Grandfather's Story. Watch our new episodes every alternate Tuesdays on YouTube and listen to us on Spotify, Apple and Google Podcast every alternate Thursdays. New episodes will be published first on YouTube and we'll be publishing once every 2 weeks this season. We've also just launched our new website, so pay us a visit at somethingprivate.fm if you'd like to share your story with us or work with us. Otherwise, you can send us a message on Instagram at somethingprivatepod or email us at nicole@somethingprivate.fm. We're immensely grateful for all the support you guys have given us, and we really couldn't have come this far without you. If you'd like to keep supporting our work, become our Patreon at patreon.com/somethingprivatepod. That's patreon.com/somethingprivatepod. Now back to the episode. On that note, there has been a couple of incidents on racism that have occurred in the last couple of months. I think the really notable one is the one where the ex-Nyan Poly lecturer came up to an interracial couple and verbally assaulted them.
Yeah.
And then the one with this Hindu family who was trying to do their prayer rituals and then a Chinese woman coming to interrupt them. So I think I saw a lot of opinions that were showing a lot of disdain or a lot of anger towards these incidents of racism. But I think there were a whole variety of opinions online, right?
Yeah.
I think my question to you is, how does that make you feel when you saw cases like these?
It definitely affects me to a very large degree. So I do feel very strongly about racism and its prevalence in our society. I do have many emotions and I mean, people think that emotions in politics is a bad thing, but I do feel like you do need some form of empathy and being able to understand what people are going through. So I did feel like these incidences very deeply, and it did affect me for quite a while, especially because as a young mother, I really do think about how I would raise my 2 children in this country. And I think that even though we see the racism that's very obvious and very aggressive, there is some form of undercurrent of racism in our institutions, like our schools, our workplaces. So that's why I did bring up the topic of racism in schools in Parliament, and I did ask the question if we could publicize the number of incidences of racism in schools, so we can know if this is a problem, and if it's something that we can address. And of course, the Workers' Party, we have kind of campaigned for anti-discrimination legislation in workplaces to protect minorities. And this is not just racial minorities. It can also be people with disabilities.
Yep.
Who may be discriminated in workplaces as well, or stamping out misogyny that's prevalent in some workplaces.
Like mothers who go on maternity leave and then return and then get fired and stuff like that, right? Yeah. I think that's something that the women's rights group has been quite vocal about as well.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I think the whole conversation around race, it does feel like we keep having the same types of conversations.
Yeah.
So I think Channel News Asia recently did a piece on discussing race again, I think maybe a couple of weeks back. And they brought up that very notorious video of another MP basically asking some young adults about their brush with racism. And it feels, that video was in 2016. And it's very interesting because now, 5 years later, it feels like we are talking about the same thing. We still are struggling with the same problems. I think my question to you is does that feel frustrating for you? Do you feel like we have made little progress in terms of talking about race?
It's tough for me because I don't know what to measure this progress on. So, I'm still reflecting and thinking about this. But I did have a conversation with someone the other day, and, they said that progress looks like you. So someone like me was elected, a minority Malay MP, who, was also the youngest in recent history. So I think that should count as progress. Because, for a long time, even for me personally, I didn't feel represented in Parliament. But now, we have 4 opposition MPs who are from minority communities. So I think, yeah, that does smell like progress to me. Yeah.
That's very heartening to hear. Rounding up our conversation about race, besides legislation, how does that look like on the day-to-day for the average Singaporean? Because I think for a lot of us tuning in, I think majority of on a side note, a majority of our listeners are quite young and quite aware, socially aware as well, right? How would you, I guess, advise them on furthering conversations about race?
So I think firstly, if you do encounter racism around you, don't dismiss it, especially if it's being done to, someone that you know, or even just someone that you work with or you go to school with. I think that's important because a lot of times we're in positions of power and we do have the ability to call out these things. And that can, also apply to things like sexism. I think rejecting racism is important, and it's an important first step. We haven't reached that point yet where we can have in-depth discussions on race and come up with solutions. Especially with my interactions with all the different types of residents I meet, racism is still such a taboo subject. And I do feel that people can be so casually racist without knowing. So even things like casual racism and microaggressions are not really spoken about. Concerns about them are dismissed. And I think, we really need to look at the impact of these very casual forms of discrimination, especially on minorities, and to see, how as a country we can progress forward.
I think, I feel like as a nation, we need to do a bit of soul searching, right, in general. I think with incidents of race.
I do think there's a gap in the generations. So I think the past generations didn't really see racism or didn't realize that what was happening was racist. But I think now, we're more aware of the struggles that each of us face. And, I think we are ready to have those very tough conversations. And I mean, this was shown last year, during elections. I think it's just how can we have these conversations in an open and non-judgmental way, and most importantly, come up with solutions. Because I think having discussions over and over again doesn't really help us to move forward. So we really need to come up with concrete solutions. And I'm repeating myself, but like I said, one of them is anti-discrimination legislation. So we can start protecting our workers in their workplaces, and and start creating a culture that doesn't accept racism even in its most casual forms.
It's a complicated issue.
Yeah.
I was going to ask also, I think on a bit of a side note, before we touch on other social issues, I think there are some people that are not even from the older generation, but even people in our generation who, feel like the whole discussion around race is very unproductive. Because it seems, in their words, right, it's a situation where people are just, like you said, overly emotional, about a microaggression. And some of these people, most of them are from the majority race, they find it counterproductive. I guess the question is, how do we have constructive conversations, right? And how much is too much in terms of holding space for somebody of a minority race who tells you that this is a difficult thing I went through,
I think that's very tough. I think, there have been some attempts to hold these conversations. But I think the first step is to recognize that there is a problem. So I think even then there's a barrier. I think we recognize that very obvious forms of racism, harassment and assault, like that person who was attacking this interracial couple. I think we are able to recognize that, but I think where we haven't progressed is that we don't recognize the insidious forms of racism. So that's the racism that's in our schools, in our workplaces. And I do think that to have constructive conversations on that, we have to create an environment where minorities feel heard. I think it's important to include the major stakeholders in this conversation, which is minorities. And I think, we should take a step back and be more open to listening into learning rather than just, kind of try and stick some solutions down our throats.
Besides talking about racism, I think you are personally quite invested in touching on social issues.
Yeah.
So, you've touched on things like mental health, you've touched on things like workplace harassment, sexual violence, and most recently, I think like last week, you did your speech on how sexuality education is the first line of defense against sexual violence, right? So tell me a bit about, your experiences with like talking about social issues and like why this in particular now is important.
So it's important to me as, these issues are the lived experiences of many. And, as someone who's been given the privilege to represent people in Parliament, I do feel that it's important that we give people who are often unheard a voice and, that their issues and concerns are elevated. I asked a parliamentary question a few months ago on how many cases of reported sexual assault there are in Singapore. And the answer was that from 2017 to 2019, there were almost 7,500 reported cases of sexual assault. So that's 6 a day. So to me, that number was, shocking. It did show me that we need to address this in a very important and holistic way. So, we started doing research on sexuality education and how minors are taught about boundaries, consent, bodily autonomy, and respect for one another. And we did see that there's only a nationally government mandated program that starts in primary 5. So before that, they do have a few lessons here and there, but it's not structured and it's not mandated in every school. So I did think that, it's important that we start in preschool because that's where children are building their foundations and that's where they learn to create boundaries and things like that. So I think it's important that we teach consent in an open and non-judgmental way, especially to preschoolers.
I think a lot of us were, I speak for myself and I think people within my community were really glad that you brought this up in Parliament because I think it's the first time that MP has tackled such a specific topic on like sexual violence that's beyond like legislation, for example, and then touching about sexuality education can be quite like a taboo topic, even now in like 2021. I think it's something that you don't often hear politicians talking about. So thank you. I think that was great.
I think it's important that we distinguish sexuality education from just sex. So it's not about just sex. It's about learning consent. It's about learning, respect for one another, and also even learning about your own body. So learning about, things like what's a good touch and what's a bad touch, and learning how to speak out when something that makes you feel uncomfortable is happening to you. And I think there was some concerns as well that, parents should be leading the conversation. But, only 50% of parents in a survey that was conducted by Aware are comfortable talking to their children about sexuality education. And not all children come from, loving, caring homes. Some of them come from abusive homes. So if we don't reach to those children, we're not really taking our responsibility of minors seriously.
1 year on, looking back on the journey, right? What are some of like the most, I guess, like memorable instances or like things that have made you feel like this has been worth the journey?
So there are a few. One was, so we were doing house visits and I bumped into this young girl. She was wearing the hijab and she was coming to me in tears actually because she felt like, she's never been represented before. And she really felt like seeing me in the political arena gave her hope that, in the future, maybe she could, make a difference as well. The second one actually was one that really touched me in a time where I think I was going to a very dark place. So there was this hashtag on Twitter called Cats for Raeesah, and I love cats. And that during a time where I thought the world was crashing around me and it was a really tough time. So seeing that hashtag and like, you know, seeing people share their cats and pictures of their pets for me. Like there are even like parrots and even like some more exotic pets. Yeah, it was really, really touching. And I thought like it was such a symbol of how much compassion that the younger generation has. And I think that's what I noticed during elections was that people who like were coming from a place of understanding, empathy and compassion were a lot of the young people that I met.
Yeah. And I'm also thinking, you actually hold a lot of like titles.
Yeah.
Pressured?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of pressure. But I think it's important, you know, to always be kept on my toes because, you know, I find this is a really, really important job. You know, and I take it really seriously, so I invest pretty much my whole life in it. I sacrifice a lot of things, like my own career and you know, even time with my family. But, you know, I recognize that I've been given a very important role and I do take it seriously.
What do the next 3 years kind of look like for you personally and also for the rest of like your team?
I think, you know, the next 3 years look like a lot of hard work, a lot of dedication, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. But I think, you know, we are definitely looking forward to building our presence in Parliament and to serve our residents as best as we can.
So, to round up our conversation, do you have any parting thoughts?
A year and a half ago, or even a year ago, I would never have imagined that I would be where I am today, as a member of Parliament and as a representative to a GRC. I hope that seeing me in this position, other people would also be empowered to claim their stake in other positions of power.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Raeesah. Thanks for coming down.
Thanks for inviting me. This is fun.
With that, season 4 has come to an end. I know, you guys already miss my voice. Thank you guys for joining us in our journey in amplifying the voices of women across Southeast Asia. We really couldn't have come this far and told these many stories without you. So if you guys want to keep tuning into something private, you have to give this video a like, leave us a comment, subscribe, and share about us with as many friends and family as possible. We'll see you guys soon.